Thank you for having us. Great to see such a crowd at this late time. We're here today to talk about shifting towards circularity with new materials, and I hope we have a very interesting discussion here. But before we get into the discussion, I think it's time that we give ourselves a quick minute to introduce ourselves. So my name is Marcus Behrendt. I'm with BMW I Ventures. We are the corporate venture fund at BMW, investing in startups. One of the startups we have invested in sits at the table here too. And now I would just hand over to you to do a quick introduction of yourself. What drives you?
Thank you. My name is Schoenegger. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of a Swiss-based bag brand called QWSTION. And we started in 2008 making bags from plants in a world full of plastics. And by doing so, we started developing our own materials. And one of them is BananaTex, which is a textile made from banana plants.
Good afternoon. My name is Vishaal Shah. I'm a Kenyan Indian living in London, and I'm the growth director of envoPAP, and we are a sustainable packaging company.
Good afternoon. My name is Efrat Friedland, founder of materialscout and co-founder of Positive Plastics, based here in Munich. I'm an ex-designer and a relentless optimist and passionate about materials.
Good afternoon. My name is Fischer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bcomp, a scale-up that has developed natural fiber composites. You all know carbon fiber composites from your bike frame or your tennis racket. So we use the same approach, simply that we use natural fibers to reinforce plastics that allow us to make much more efficient structures, some of which we sell into the automotive industry.
So on the stage, as you heard, we have one consultant and three founders. I think that's a very, very good match, because usually consultants are, by nature, provocative and inquisitive, and have some interesting theories about what companies could do better, and if they're really, really at the heart of it. So Efrat is here with us, and my question to you, my first question would be, is there actually a difference between sustainability and circularity? And, on a broad scheme for the planet, aren't we sustainable anyway? The planet has seen much more catastrophes than us coming, but isn't that a little egoistic approach that we are saying we want to be sustainable in our short lifetime for the next generations? What do you think about that?
Well, that's a big question. Of course, there are many differences between circularity and sustainability, but if we focus on materials for the sake of this panel, because the title is New Materials, I believe that there are no such thing as sustainable materials, to be frank. So you can take a truly sustainable material, wood for example, chop it, make paper out of it, use it for packaging and throw it away. And plastic is regarded as a very non-sustainable material, and it could last for years. Could be made housing of a coffee machine, which we would not use maybe wood to make a coffee machine out of, and live with us for decades. Circular materials we can categorize them maybe to two families. Natural materials that are circular, so go back to the biosphere, and man-made materials that go back to the technosphere with different types of recycling. So this is maybe the basic definition or differentiation between circular materials and sustainable materials.
Great, thank you. Vishaal, you want to talk a little bit about the company and what you define and how you came to what you do and what your contribution to circularity is?
So we basically are a sustainable packaging company. And the reason really when we started wasn't really about sustainability. I mean, sustainability is a nice word, and like Efrat said, I mean, what you define as sustainability varies. So I come from Kenya, my partner comes from India. One of the big challenges we had was getting raw materials for packaging, because in most of the developing world, there are restrictions around currencies, importation, politics. I mean, there's a lot of other challenges out there. So we had to find materials that could be found locally and that could be easily converted into uses that we wanted for. It could be printing paper, could be bags, paper bags, could be cartons, could be anything like that. And so envoPAP was actually born to kind of use the waste of agriculture, because most of the developing world is a big agriculture producer, to use the waste of agriculture, which is usually burned. And by waste, I mean when a crop is harvested, whatever is left in the ground, or when the seeds are taken out for rice, wheat, etc., what the stalks are left behind, that is then basically burned for either fuel or just burned on the ground because it's the cheapest way to kind of get rid of it. Can we use that because fiber to create paper? And that's how envoPAP was born. And the whole objective was to do two things. One, to replace plastic where we can, but secondly is to replace wood, because both of these materials are imported. So that's the reason we came about. And today we've been going for 8 years. We founded in 2015, and we supply a number of multinational brands, and we supply to over 60 countries.
I really enjoyed that story because, out of need, you became circular before we probably here talked about it in our industrial nations, being spoiled by having crude oil at our hand for anything we want to do. But that is a good segue, I think, to you and your company, because you're not taking waste, as I understand now, but what do you actually do?
Yes, that's correct. So when we started our bag brand in 2008, it was clear that almost 70% or 75% of all bags in the world are made from plastics, and we thought that we might do something about that, so we decided to use as many natural materials as possible. In the beginning it was cotton, because that was all we could get in the market in a thick quality, but cotton actually is not a good fiber for a bag. It's too soft and too short. So when we grew as a brand, we had the possibility to start developing new fibers or new textiles, and we worked with hemp for a couple of years, and with bamboo and linen fibers, and in 2015 we kind of discovered a certain species of the banana called Musa textilis, and we understand it seems to be the strongest fiber in nature, and we thought that is maybe a good starting point. Also the way it grows only in permaculture, agroforestry. It needs high trees to give shade. There are no chemicals involved, no fertilizer. It doesn't need water in addition to rain. So we thought it's a good start, and it was used, still is used for shipping ropes and heavy-duty materials, but no one made a fine yarn and a fabric out of it. And this was what we did. It took us 3 years, and then we launched our first bags made from that fiber, which looks like this.
Very nice.
And as we want to make a positive impact, we announced that we share this with other companies, kind of naive from our point of view, and there was like hundreds or even thousands of companies approaching us, from automotive to footwear to sportswear to fashion to furniture, and we were overwhelmed. So we then decided to make a spin-off company, an own team, own people, just developing this further, and now you can buy shoes or wristbands or a nice bag from Stella McCartney, which is made of this material, and I hope that there will be much more coming in the next years.
You used the word open source when we talked first. That was, I think, very interesting to open source your material, basically. But one little, challenging question. Now you're using plants, and plants are competing with plants for food. How do you deal with this problem and the implication that might come from that point of view?
Actually, as our kind of banana only grows in permaculture environment, it's actually used to reforest areas that have been rainforest, mostly in the Philippines. It's quite similar to the chocolate project we heard this morning in Peru. It brings back biodiversity back, basically. It gives a stable income to the local communities, and there's a lot of rainforest. 80% have been destroyed in the Philippines. So there's a lot we can scale up, but at some point there is an end to it. We will not be able to replace polyester, which accounts for more than half of all textiles we wear, or cotton, which is also like the second biggest chunk of that industry.
So Switzerland meets Philippines in this case.
In a way.
Another Swiss company, and from fashion to industrial materials, Christian Fischer, you're working for Bcomp. Can you tell us your story?
Sure. So we actually started building skis with my co-founder Julia 15 years ago. While we were PhD students at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and similar to what Vishaal just said before, we didn't start using natural fibers for the sake of using natural fibers, but because they had particular features we wanted to integrate in a ski building. Being obsessed with building the lightest possible skis. And so we went on building these skis, and actually what was special about the skis was not how we build the skis, but really how we designed the semi-finished product that we put into the ski to reinforce the ski. And so we said, look, rather than building yet another ski company, and the space is already very crowded, plus that less snow and all you know all of that. It's a very tough niche. We said, okay, let's take a step back in the supply chain and actually push the development of the semi-finished product using flax fibers as a raw material input. And I think that was a big advantage, because instead of going and trying to sell the green aspect as a premium, which back then was absolutely impossible, we were really forced to develop a semi-finished product, a reinforcement material that would outperform the benchmark based on engineering metrics, hardcore. So lightweight performance, measuring against carbon fiber composites, and then also plastics in mainstream applications. And so that's how we managed to actually develop a solution that now competes against carbon, and allowed us to first enter what we call the recreational market, but then also enter the mobility space, for which we identified motorsports as being a stepping stone, featuring very, very similar design cycle times than the sports and leisure industry we were used to, but then also giving us the entry door into the large-scale mobility industry, because most car makers have motorsports departments, be it more lower kind of brands like Seat, which has Cupra, but all the way, of course, to BMW, with BMW Motorsports, with whom we have been collaborating now for many years, and really applying this, what we call race to road strategy, starting with Formula E cars, then DTM cars, GT4 cars, and then working with the colleagues from the performance department to bring the solution onto the roads.
You mentioned an interesting point, that you want to compete on the same level with the classical materials, classical meaning the ones that we have been using in the industry. Does circular always have to be more expensive than non-circular?
I don't think so. At the end of the day, in our example, it's about organizing carbon atoms in a smart way. So either you take a soup of carbon atoms, petrol or petrol derivatives, and you put a lot of energy into it to actually organize them, typically what people do with carbon fiber composites or carbon filaments, or you use nature as an energy input to actually organize your carbon atoms and then extract it from the fibers, also like you guys do for the bags, and then you also already start with a certain amount of energy that was given to you for free, basically, and you start from this organization, adding then the processing steps. Of course, what we see is that we fight supply chains that have been around for decades, and of course that are extremely optimized. All the plastic, mainstream polymers are amongst the most efficient supply chains that there are out there. So of course, to reach the scaling effects that we are being challenging against, I think that's the biggest challenge. But physically, or if you look at it from a pure energy perspective, there's no reason that more sustainable solutions will be more expensive.
If I may add,
please.
I think one of the problems or the challenges is that still, even companies that want to and are underway a transition to circular economy still calculate their bill of materials in a linear manner. And the misconception is that circular products or sustainable products are always more expensive. At materialscout, we had the pleasure of proving a few of our clients wrong. But we always try to convince a change of methodology or strategy, meaning we have to first of all value the materials. So even the cheapest plastic we should value it. And when we add to it services as recall system, convincing the brands that they should have ownership on their materials. And one day, it could be in 2 days, 2 months, 2 years, they will get the materials back. Therefore, the calculation should be, from the start, completely different. And at the end of the road, hopefully, circularity or sustainability will no longer be perceived as more expensive, not to the producers, definitely not to the end users, and will be profitable for everyone. So that's maybe to answer.
And so when you say more expensive, I think you need to kind of break it down into two elements. You can think about it more expensive as a price that you or me or the consumer pays for it, or you could think of it more expensive as the cost. And when I say the cost, if you think about taking natural resources, burning it, yes, the cost of extracting and after burning it, but the damage that goes into the ecosystem, to the healthcare system, that cost is going to be borne by somebody, maybe further down the line, the future generation. So I would say, in fact, not using renewable resources could actually be cheaper from a cost perspective. But in our case, from just using materials, waste materials for creating packaging that we do, from a price perspective, today, we are effectively same price or even cheaper, depending on where you look at it, because if you think about it, we're using waste as a raw material, and we are effectively creating fibers that can be put into the existing infrastructure. So you don't have to invest into new infrastructure. So you're just substituting wood for agricultural waste. We're substituting plastic with some biopolymers that are being used, and we're creating products that are easily recyclable, easily biodegradable, marine degradable, home compostable.
So if I understand you right, you're asking or demanding a full cost calculation, inheriting all the costs from the beginning to the start, from the well, so that it's not, we're not using or living off of the past, or I think you said even the future. So we're actually calculating all of it. That's very interesting. Which are the materials that you think will be revolutionized next? Is there such a thing of revolutionizing materials?
You asking me?
I asked before, but...
Yeah, I think first of all, there are no such thing as new materials. We have to put it in to understand, because if we look at the periodic table elements, no one found a new element in the last couple of good decades. So all the new materials are man-made materials or material combinations like yourself. I'm mostly excited by materials that have longevity and that could last for many, many, many years and could be recycled endlessly. Currently, metals, for instance. Yeah, my personal opinion.
I actually hope there is not one material that will be the revolution and replacing everything, because that has been a bad idea always, and it cannot be seen in nature that something dominates everything. Throughout the past years, we have been in several events and trade shows and have seen other innovators, and I hope that the future will be a variety of bio-produced materials. There's a lot going on with the people cooking proteins and different substances that they copy and paste from nature. There's a lot fiber innovation going on, from pineapple to bananas, from cocoa to you name it. And I think in a few years there will be quite many alternatives that can be used instead of polyester or cotton.
I think there are many good material solutions out there today. There are two things, and in my opinion, is number one, we still can reduce a lot, just really using what is needed at the place it's needed to perform a certain function. So just by reducing, but then also reorganizing our supply chains, and Efrat, you were touching on that before, expanding the responsibility of the producers of the products. Take BMW. Today, your ownership or your responsibility for the car ends at the dealership, right? Pretty much when the car is sold, it's kind of outside your scope. Now, imagine, and I know that there are efforts going in that direction, that you actually expand your responsibility all the way, beyond, at the end, towards the end of the user phase. I'd be very happy to recuperate the parts made from our materials because we know what to do with it. but I need to have access to it. So then, we can go as crazy as materials as a service business model, where I actually not sell the material to you, but you just rent it from me, and then I get it back, and then I can feed it in, I can reorganize the material and feed it into new verticals. So I think that's for me the more important step than actually inventing the magic material that's going to solve all the problems, which I think we know it doesn't exist.
And I was going to say was actually, I completely agree. I don't think there's any new materials. I think there are going to be a lot of new uses for existing materials. So what that means is if you can substitute one material for another very easily within the same ecosystem, it means that more of the world will be able to adopt, I would guess, more environmentally friendly practices, so that you don't have to move something from one end of the world to the other end of the world. If you can find something local, I think that will kind of go through. And in our case, I think food packaging, flexible packaging, all of these areas where you're actually taking fossil fuels, new fossil fuels, to create new packaging, because there's no facilities for recycling in most of the world. If you can replace that with something that is found locally, I think that's going to change the whole ecosystem.
And maybe if I may add something, I think if you look at design schools, academies, young designers are constantly working more and more with natural materials. And listening to a couple of talks that we had here, we're talking about biodiversity and nature. And aside materials, we should look also at technologies. So how to work with nature, not against nature. And there are many plant-based materials nowadays that are commercially available, be it from banana fibers or sugarcane or algae, but also plants that could actually extract metals from mines that are no longer operational, from the tailings, and then once you harvest the plants, you get copper. So fantastic things, still under development, but I think this should be the direction that we hopefully should go according to.
So, picking up on that, what is standing in the way to become more circular? Why do we feel it's so slow?
Consumption.
Consumption? So we should consume less?
Yes.
Okay. Less coffee for me then.
We just heard it's good for your skin in the last talk.
Okay.
I think there is a lot to do from policymakers. I think there needs to be regulations that are in place to, let's say, regulate greenwashing, for example. I know all those things are coming and seem to come because that is really going to move the needle. And when it comes to taxation, where real costs are put on those who create them, then alternative materials and circular materials will be much more competitive. And from in our economical system, that will cause the major breakthrough, I think. So
CO2 carbon credits is a good way in that? Regulation on this?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it needs to be added because it's the reality.
Mm-hmm. So it's incorporating the costs that are built in the system. So we're using resources of the past, back to that idea, and just using them for free, and you are saying let's reincorporate those costs.
It's not free.
It's not free, exactly. It shouldn't be free. Yeah.
But also simplifying regulation. At the moment, there is extra bureaucracy. For instance, if we look at recycled plastics, it's still defined as waste material, and it's banned from different countries. So if, for instance, Germany wants to import recycled plastic from France, it's stuck in the custom for hundreds of days. So regulation at the moment hinders circularity. It's very challenging. So in addition to that.
And if you were to sort of look at it from one of the previous talks, talked about batteries and the source of a lot of lithium coming from China, the geopolitical challenges that we're facing. I think today, the way forward would be more education. I think A lot of resources are available locally. There are lots of different alternative uses, and educating the public, I think, will be the way forward. Besides regulation, obviously regulation is important because you need to make sure the standards are there, but education is going to be equally valuable from one perspective. And the other side is also, you have to look at it from a commercial sense as well. So the reason we started our business was it was cheaper for us to use local resources. Now a lot of our farmers are actually beginning to conserve the resources because it's become a revenue stream for them. And they are now learning how to use less chemicals within the farming infrastructure because it's cheaper to not use chemicals, which is good for everyone, but also because of the war in Ukraine and Russia, which controls a lot of the chemicals and the fertilizer industry. So all of these changes are coming through because of education. So I think education is going to be driving the future revolution.
Question to you, Christian. When do you think that the epoxies that you're still using will be natural-based or fully sustainable?
So there is a bit a longer way to go for the epoxies. There is now typically the thermoplastic materials we use at large scale for interior applications. There are some nice models like companies like Borealis who actually now gives us access to 100% bio-based PP. And it's really, they work with it like with energy mix companies. So you pay a premium, and if you want 100% bio-based, you can get it, of course, at that premium, and you get certificates that actually you do have. They have enough input material that is bio-based, so you actually are sure that you can, that they can sell that amount to you. Then the question, of course, is do the OEMs, and at the end of the day, does the end consumer, is she or he prepared to pay a premium for a full bio-based content? I guess the reality shows that is not the case yet. Where we're back to, the change of legal framework needs to happen because otherwise it's not gonna happen. Epoxy resins, we have now bio-based contents of about 30-40%, and I guess it's possible to increase, but then again you always have to be very careful with what the feedstock is, because as you were also saying, typically for flax it's a rotation crop, so it's not competing against food crops, but there are some materials that are being used in the bio-based chemistry that you shouldn't touch on.
Interesting. We're coming close to the end of our time, but do you guys have any points you want to bring up or any questions to the audience? Statements to the audience that you want to share?
I would just say one thing. I think the future is going to be, we just need to become more human. I think if you look at the olden ways, people used to look after the environment, not because it was required as an ESG thing, it was because it was good for them. People used to look after the communities because it was a way of helping each other, and as a group we benefit from each other. And we used to do things honestly, which is now called governance. So ESG is really what we used to do in the past. It's just now got a formal lens. So if we become human, I think the world will be a lot better place.
Very good. Then I thank you all. I think everybody's around for questions later with very interesting products and stories behind them and ideas and very diverse background on where the companies are based, where the companies were founded. Thought that was a very helpful discussion. Thank you all.